Hello everybody and welcome to another A+1102 lesson with a bunch of practice questions at the end where I'll tell you everything you need to know about the particular exam objective that we're looking at today, which is right here, and then I'll give you some questions that'll help you get an idea of what you might be asked on your exam. So I'm not going to waste your time, let's get straight to it. The first thing we need to cover is the idea of work group versus domains. Now, we did cover this a while back in an earlier video. We looked at the general difference between work groups and domains. So remember, a work group is represented over here in the bottom left. We have a couple of different computers and they are directly sharing resources with one another, represented by these arrows. So this PC is sharing resources with this PC and vice versa, and sharing this one with this one, sharing resources with this one, right? They're individually deciding to share resources with each other. That is different to a domain, in which you have a domain controller, a centralized server, which is in charge of monitoring and representing and configuring a wide variety of different devices. So you can see here, this domain controller has access to all of these devices. So it can implement changes over the network, it can manage user profiles over the network, it can manage shared resources over the network and configure these devices accordingly. So in one scenario, you have to individually share, walk over to this PC and configure it to share with this PC and vice versa, and you have to go around manually configuring each one. In this one, you can simply utilize the domain controller or the centralized server, shall I say, to manage a wide variety of devices and user profiles. So that's the overarching difference. We'll have a look at some specific differences though coming up now. So you need to know about shared resources. I went through it roughly just then really, but in more detail in a work group, which was again this one in the bottom left here. Each computer manages its own shared folders and permissions individually. So again, it's configured individually. Users need individual accounts on every computer to access shared resources. So you don't have access to, you may have worked in an enterprise environment where maybe there's a bunch of different laptops or desktops that you could use, and you could go to the laptop, let's say we go to this PC, we can sign in with our username and password, which will send our information over to the centralized server, and that will then load our profiles onto that computer. But if we were to log out of this one and log into this one, the same thing would happen, right? We would log in, the domain controller would say, okay, they've logged into this computer, I'll send those user profiles and settings over to this one, right? That doesn't happen in a work group. In a work group, you need to set up an account and configure that account on every single device. There's no centralized controller there. So that's one of the key differences there. Generally, workgroups are less secure because centralized control and password management aren't there. It's not existent, right? So there's more room for error there. You're having to set it up on each individual machine. On a domain, your shared resources are managed by that central server, as I just kind of went through. And really, what you need to know is that it's centrally managed, right? As opposed to being managed individually. That's the key concept. I don't need to harp on about it anymore. File servers, the same kind of concept. It's going to be the same concept all the way through. Work group, individual computers can share files with other computers, but again, it has to be set up individually to do that. Whereas in a domain, you have a dedicated file server which stores and manages data centrally, and that can be loaded onto any of those devices at any time due to the central management of a domain and how that works. It offers better scalability. A domain offers better scalability when compared to a worker group. It offers better security, and of course, it offers centralized administration, whereas a work group has limited scalability. As you can imagine, you have to set up every single device individually. It also has limited security because each server requires individual management. Every PC requires individual management. There's a lot of room for error there, a lot that can go wrong. A work group is best for small working environments, whilst a domain is best for large networks, right? So if you're in a large enterprise network, you're going to want a domain. It's better security, it's easier to manage, etc., right? All of the things we've covered so far. So basically for your exam, right, just think, if it's a big enterprise environment and you're prioritizing security and convenience, you're going to want a domain because of how easy it is to manage due to that centralized server. If you've got a couple of bros hanging out in the basement and you just want to share some files with each other, then a work group should be fine, right? That's the kind of concept we're looking at. Mapped drives. In a work group, you have to individually map your network drives on each computer. On a domain, users can map your drives to shared folders on the domain server or other domain joined devices. So it comes down really to the idea of that centralized management. So in a domain, the centralized management allows easier creation and access to map drives across the domain, whereas in a work group, each map drive requires separate configuration on each shared folder. So you've got to set it up individually again. It all comes back to work group is individually set up and configured. Domain is a centralized server managing everything. That's the key concept across all of these sub-dot points within this exam objective. Additional considerations, we talked about network security. User accounts and permissions. Workgroups require managing user accounts on every computer, whereas in a domain, you can use centralized management to manage your user accounts with consistent permissions. So no matter what computer you log into, you're going to have the same permissions. Whereas if someone accidentally is a bit half asleep while they're managing one device in a work group, there could be security issues there because a user could have elevated permissions that they really shouldn't have. So that's the key thing to take into consideration. Network troubleshooting. Troubleshooting in workgroups can be complex because it requires individual troubleshooting on every device, whereas in a domain, you often have built-in diagnostic tools and centralized logging for easier troubleshooting. A lot of the issues with the devices are logged on the central server, so it makes it easy to see things that are going wrong with all of the devices. So again, domain's great for a big environment with lots of devices. Workgroups okay for a small environment with a couple. Time for some questions. Let's see what the kind of things we might be asked for our exam will be. Question 1. In a small office network, all computers can access shared resources directly from each other with no central server controlling user accounts or security. This scenario describes A, a work group, B, a domain, C, a wide area network, or D, the use of an ONT. Pause for a moment if you need some time. Your answer coming in 3, 2, 1. Now, that is a work group. So they're sharing files directly with one another with no centralized management. That's clearly describing a work group. Hopefully we got that one. The next question. A small business has a network where each computer manages its own shared folders and requires users to have separate accounts on each device to access them. What type of network setup is this most likely? A, a work group, B, a domain, C, a local area network, or D, a standalone network. Pause for a few moments if you need some time. Your answer in 3, 2, 1. Now that is a work group again, right? That was clearly a work group. Have a read through. If you didn't get it, head back to the video, watch it, but hopefully we got that was a work group. Next question. A company has a central server that manages user accounts and permissions for accessing shared resources like printers and file servers across the network. Users have a single login that grants access to all authorized resources. What network structure is this? A work group, B, a domain, C, cloud-based network, or D, managed network service. Your answer coming in 3, 2, 1. It is a domain. Centralized management is the key thing we're looking for there. And we had that in that question, so that was a domain.